At 2 a.m., the freezing rain bit into my skin as I was violently exiled from my own home, all because of defective scent glands. Useless. My alpha had spat, looking me dead in the eye. Fast forward 3 years, and that same man is on his knees, begging for my blood. Yeah, karma's a bitch. Let's get into it. Hi everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm finally sitting down to tell the story I've been hinting at for months. This is the darkest, most traumatic chapter of my life. But I'm sharing it because I know there are other displaced Omegas out there who feel broken. You aren't. To understand how bad it got, you need to understand where I came from. I grew up in the Redwood Pack Estate, tucked away in the deep, foggy forests of Northern California. It was an elite, wealthy pack, and I was basically pack royalty by association. From the time I was 14, I was betrothed to Domenico. Domenico was the alpha heir, gorgeous, towering, commanding, and fiercely protective. Back then, I thought he hung the moon. He used to sneak into my room, wrap me in his heavy, pine-scented jackets, and whisper about the future we'd build once I presented, and we could officially mate. But biology had a cruel sense of humor. When a shifter turns 18, the presentation hits. For Omegas, it's supposed to be this beautiful, overwhelming bloom. You get a sweet, intoxicating scent, usually fruit, honey, or flowers, and you have your first heat. It's the ultimate biological green light. My 18th birthday came and went, and nothing happened. At first, we thought I was just a late bloomer, but by 19, the whispers in the pack started. The other Omegas would look at me with pity. The alphas would walk right past me without a second glance. I had no scent. If you leaned in really close, I just smelled like cold rain on concrete. Barely there. Neutral. Dead. Domenico dragged me to the pack's chief medical officer, Dr. Gallagher. I will never forget sitting in that freezing, sterile exam room, wearing a flimsy paper gown while Gallagher reviewed my blood work. He adjusted his glasses, looked at Domenico, and said the words that ruined my life. He's a null Omega. Defective. His scent glands are completely dormant, and his reproductive system is biologically stunted. He will never bear a strong heir alpha. The shift in Domenico was instantaneous. It wasn't just disappointment, it was disgust. The boy who used to promise me the world suddenly wouldn't even look at me on the drive home. Things escalated quickly. Domenico's mother, Beatrice, a terrifying traditional Luna, convened the pack council. She argued that a defective Omega could not sit beside the alpha. Pack morale would plummet. And Domenico? He didn't defend me. Instead, he started spending late nights, patrolling. That's when Leo transferred in from a neighboring pack. Leo was everything I wasn't. He was petite, giggly, and smelled overwhelmingly of crushed strawberries and vanilla. Every time he walked into a room, every alpha's head turned. Domenico started assigning him to private administrative duties. I wasn't stupid. I knew what was happening, but I was so desperate to hold on to my home, my life, and my mate, that I swallowed my pride. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday in November. I was called into the main lodge. The entire council was seated at the heavy oak table. Domenico stood at the head, his jaw tight, refusing to make eye contact with me. Leo was standing right behind him, a smug little smile playing on his lips, wearing Domenico's oversized flannel shirt. My shirt. Caleb. Domenico's voice was devoid of any warmth. It was the harsh, booming tone of an alpha addressing a subordinate. The pack requires strength. We require a lineage. You cannot provide that. As of tonight, I am formally severing our betrothal, and the Council has voted to exile you from Redwood territory. Your presence is a biological liability." I literally couldn't breathe. "Domenico, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face in front of 20 silent pack members. "I'll do anything. I'll work in the kitchens. Let me stay. I have nowhere else to go." "You are a null," Beatrice chimed in coldly. "You have 30 minutes to pack a single bag. Gideon will escort you to the border." Gideon, the beta enforcer, grabbed my arm tight enough to leave bruises. I looked at Domenico one last time, hoping to see a shred of the boy who loved me. He just turned his back and pulled Leo against his chest. 30 minutes later, I was standing on the side of a slick, freezing highway in the pouring rain, holding a cheap duffel bag, officially packless. The physical pain of a broken mating bond feels like your ribs are cracking inward. I vomited on the side of the road, curled into a ball in the mud, and prayed I wouldn't wake up. I didn't die that night on the highway. A passing trucker gave me a ride to Portland, Oregon, and for the next 3 years I completely disappeared into human society. Being a packless defective Omega in a big city is dangerous. Without a pack's protection or an alpha's scent on me, I was vulnerable to rogue shifters. I got a tiny, moldy apartment above a loud dive bar and took a job doing data entry for a logistics company. I kept my head down. I ate cheap instant ramen war scent blockers, even though I barely had a scent to block, just out of paranoia, and tried to forget the Redwood Pack existed. But right around my 21st birthday, something terrifying happened. I was at work when I got hit by a fever, so intense it blurred my vision. My bones felt like they were literally melting and reshaping themselves. I barely made it out of the office before I collapsed in the back alley behind the building. The pain was blinding. I was screaming, scratching at my own throat. When I woke up, I wasn't in an alley. I was strapped to a bed in an underground medical facility, bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Standing over me was a man in a lab coat, looking at a clipboard with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. "I'm Dr. Mercer," he said, gently noticing my panic. "You're in a safe clinic for displaced shifters. A rogue patrol found you unconscious. Caleb, do you have any idea what you are?" "I'm a defective," I croaked my throat raw. "A null." Dr. Mercer let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "Whoever told you that is the biggest idiot in the medical field. You aren't a null, Caleb. You're an Aurelian." I had only heard that word in myths, bedtime stories about the ancient wolf courts. Aurelian Omegas were essentially the royalty of our species, possessing genetic traits that dated back thousands of years. Dr. Mercer explained everything. Aurelian Omegas don't present at 18. Because their biology is so incredibly rare and powerful, their bodies instinctively suppress their scent and pheromones to protect them from aggressive alphas until they are fully mature at 21. My defective nature was actually a biological armor. "Your blood," Mercer said, pulling up a digital chart that showed complex, glowing molecular structures. "It contains an enzyme that is effectively a panacea for lupine biology. And your scent?" I inhaled deeply. For the first time in my life, I could smell myself. It wasn't the cloying, basic sweetness of vanilla or fruit. It was a dark, intoxicating, impossibly rich scent of rich amber burning wood and sweet petrichor. It was the kind of scent that would bring a dominant alpha to his knees. For the next 6 months, I stayed under Dr. Mercer's protection, learning how to manage my new pheromones and the overwhelming strength of an Aurelian heat. I was finally comfortable. I was thriving. I had power. Meanwhile, Karma was paying a visit to Northern California. Through the Shifter Underground network, rumors started flying about the Redwood Pack. A terrifying mutated virus called the marrow rot had broken out. It was a genetic sickness that attacked the wolves' immune systems, rendering them unable to shift and slowly shutting down their organs. Traditional medicine was useless, and the first wolf to contract it, Leo. The gossip was brutal. Domenico was reportedly losing his mind. His mate was dying, his pack was dying, and his borders were weakening. 50 of his best fighters were already bedridden. He was spending millions flying in specialists from Europe, consulting black market witches and searching ancient texts for a cure. That's how he found out about the Aurelians. The ancient texts explicitly stated that the blood of a fully matured Aurelian Omega could synthesize a cure for the marrow rot. But Aurelians were thought to be extinct. Domenico spent months tearing the country apart looking for an Aurelian signature. He hired trackers. He bribed underground clinic workers. He threw every resource the Redwood Pack had at finding this mythical cure. Eventually, a corrupt lab tech who had seen Dr. Mercer's encrypted files sold my location to him. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, almost exactly 3 years to the day since I was banished. I was sitting in my living room drinking tea and reading a book, feeling completely at peace. Then the heavy scent of distressed rotting pine hit my nose, slipping through the crack under my door. My wolf bristled instantly. There was a frantic, heavy pounding on my door. I walked over my heart, hammering in my chest, and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway was Domenico. But he looked nothing like the proud, arrogant alpha who had exiled me. He was gaunt, shivering, and covered in rain. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked completely broken. He took one breath of my amber and petrichor scent, and his eyes rolled back slightly as his alpha instincts violently collided with his desperation. He literally collapsed to his knees right there in the hallway, grabbing the hem of my sweater. "Caleb," he choked out, his voice cracking with tears. "Please, I was wrong. We're dying. Please save us." I looked down at the man who had thrown me out like garbage, feeling the absolute intoxicating rush of having the upper hand. I stood in the doorway of my dingy apartment, looking down at the man who used to be my entire world. Domenico, the untouchable alpha of the Redwood Pack, was practically vibrating with fever and sheer desperation. His usually immaculate dark hair was plastered to his forehead with rain and sweat. The smell radiating off him was atrocious, sour, rotting pine mixed with the metallic tang of pure panic. He clutched the hem of my sweater like a drowning man holding onto a life raft. "Caleb, please, I was wrong. We're dying. Please save us." I didn't pull away, but I didn't help him up either. I just stared at him, feeling a cold, crystalline calm settle over my chest. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to have him on his knees for me. Now I just felt profound pity. "Get off my floor, Domenico," I said, my voice eerily steady. "You're getting mud on my rug." He flinched, as if I had struck him, slowly rising to his feet, but keeping his head bowed, exposing his neck in a deep gesture of submission. An alpha. Submitting to an Omega. If Beatrice could see him now, she would have a stroke. I invited him inside, mostly because the neighbors were starting to peek through their peepholes. He sat on the edge of my cheap sofa, shivering while I made a cup of black coffee, and sat in the armchair opposite him. I didn't offer him any. He spent the next 20 minutes spilling everything. The marrow rot was devastating. Over 70 pack members were infected, including children. The pack's infrastructure was collapsing because the enforcers were too weak to patrol the borders. Leo, his perfect mate, was in the final stages of the disease, completely bedridden and coughing up black blood. Dr. Mercer's files. They said your blood contains the Aurelian antigen. Domenico stammered, his eyes darting to my neck, clearly overwhelmed by my scent. I know I have no right to ask. I know what I did to you was unforgivable. But the pack, Caleb, the children, they didn't exile you. He was right about one thing. The children didn't exile me. But I wasn't the naive, desperate boy he threw out into the rain. I was an Aurelian, and I knew the value of my biology. I will help, I said finally, and the relief that washed over his face was blinding. But I do not belong to you, and I do not belong to Redwood. My blood is not a charity donation. It is a highly classified medical resource, and you are going to pay for it. The next morning, I didn't go back to the estate in the passenger seat of Domenico's truck. I arrived in a convoy of sleek black SUVs, flanked by Dr. Mercer and my newly hired shifter rights attorney, Donovan Hayes. Before a single drop of my blood was drawn, we sat in the very same council room where I had been banished. The atmosphere was suffocating. Domenico sat at the head of the table looking hollowed out. To his right sat his mother, Beatrice. She looked older, her face lined with stress, but the moment I walked in, her lips curled into a sneer. You bring a lawyer to a medical emergency, Beatrice hissed. You are just as selfish as you were 3 years ago. I didn't even blink. I let my pheromones flare, just a fraction, the heavy, suffocating weight of amber and burning wood. Beatrice instantly choked on her words, her eyes widening in terror as her own Omega instincts forced her to lower her head. Let's get a few things straight, I said, sliding a thick legal document across the heavy oak table. I am the only cure for the marrow rot on this continent. If I walk out that door, Redwood is a graveyard in 2 weeks. So you will sign this contract or I am leaving. Donovan stood up, adjusting his suit, and began to read the terms loudly so the entire council could hear. The Aurelian Accord. Terms of Salvation. Term 1. Beatrice is stripped of her lunar title and permanently removed from the council, effective immediately for gross negligence in her treatment of pack members. Term 2. Domenico will temporarily step down as head alpha and place the pack under the administrative control of the Regional Shifter Task Force until the crisis is averted and a new election is held. Term 3. The Redwood Pack will pay $50 million into a secure trust fund managed by me. This fund will be dedicated entirely to building housing and providing medical care for displaced packless and defective Omegas across the country. Term 4, I am granted absolute diplomatic immunity on Redwood territory. No Alpha may approach me without my explicit verbal consent. Silence rang in the room. $50 million was almost a quarter of the pack's liquid wealth. You're extorting us, one of the elders yelled. I'm charging a premium for a rare commodity, I corrected smoothly. You have 60 seconds to sign, Domenico. Domenico didn't even read the document. He picked up the pen and signed his name on the dotted line, sealing the fate of the Redwood Pack. Beatrice burst into tears, storming out of the room, but I didn't care. I had work to do. Dr. Mercer set up a sterile field in the pack's medical wing. For the next 3 days, I was hooked up to an IV, safely donating as much plasma as my body could handle. Mercer worked around the clock, isolating the Aurelian enzymes from my blood and synthesizing them into a widespread vaccine. On the 4th day, I decided to visit the quarantine ward. I needed to see it for myself. The ward was a nightmare, row upon row of cots filled with pale, sweating wolves. At the very end of the room, in a private glass-enclosed, VIP room, was Leo. I walked up to the glass and looked inside. The boy who had worn my clothes and stolen my life looked like a ghost. His hair was falling out, his skin was terribly bruised, and he was hooked up to a ventilator. Domenico was sitting beside the bed, holding Leo's limp hand, his shoulders shaking. When Domenico saw me through the glass, he stood up and walked out into the hallway. "He's getting the first dose of the serum in an hour," Domenico said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you, Caleb. I know you hate him, but thank you for not letting him die." "I don't hate him, Domenico," I replied honestly. "I don't feel anything for him at all. But I do feel curious." Domenico frowned. Curious about what? Curious about how an elite, high-status Omega like Leo was the very first person to contract a genetic autoimmune disease. That curiosity wasn't just idle chatter. While I was donating blood, I had asked Dr. Mercer to run a full diagnostic on Leo's original blood work from before the outbreak, the samples the pack doctors had taken when the marrow rot first started showing up. 2 days later, the serum was working miracles. The fever was breaking across the pack. Children were sitting up color, returning to their cheeks. The heavy atmosphere of death lifted from the Redwood estate, replaced by a cautious, exhausted hope. But my job wasn't done. I called an emergency meeting in the main courtyard. I wanted everyone who could stand to be there. Domenico looked confused but compliant, standing near the front of the crowd. Dr. Mercer stood beside me, holding a thick medical file. "The pack is healing," I announced, my voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "But before I leave Redwood, we need to address how the marrow rot got here in the first place. This disease is incredibly rare. It doesn't just spontaneously appear in a closed ecosystem." Domenico stepped forward. "We assumed it was a rogue transmission. Someone traveling through the territory." "No." Dr. Mercer stepped up, adjusting his glasses. "It wasn't an external transmission. It was a chemical mutation, born right here in this estate. Specifically, it was localized entirely around Leo." The crowd gasped. Domenico's head snapped toward the doctor. "What are you talking about? Leo was the victim. He got hit the hardest." "He got hit the hardest because he was ground zero," I said, stepping closer to Domenico. I handed him a summary sheet. I had Mercer put together a table to explain the biological discrepancy, showing exactly what Leo's blood revealed compared to a natural presentation. Domenico stared at the paper, the color draining from his face. "Synthetic injections." "Leo is not a high-status Omega," I said, the words falling like heavy stones in the quiet courtyard. "In fact, Leo barely presented at all. He is a baseline beta with a severe inferiority complex. For the last 4 years, he has been heavily abusing ScentStim." A collective murmur of horror ripped through the crowd. ScentStim was a highly illegal black market chemical compound. Betas, or low-level Omegas, used it to artificially mimic the pheromones of a perfect fertile Omega to trap wealthy alphas. "The chemical breakdown of ScentStim is highly toxic," Dr. Mercer continued grimly. "When Leo moved into the estate, he kept using the injections to maintain his fake scent. His sweat, his bodily fluids, even his breath, it was all shedding toxic chemical byproducts. When those byproducts mixed with the localized groundwater of the estate, it mutated. It created the marrow rot." I looked Domenico dead in the eye. "Your perfect mate poisoned your entire pack, Domenico. He poisoned your elders, your warriors, and your children, all because he wanted to play dress-up and steal the alpha." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Domenico's entire reality shatter in real time. The realization that he had banished a priceless, incredibly rare Aurelian mate in favor of a fraud who literally rotted his pack from the inside out was too much for him. He dropped to his knees right there in the mud, clutching his chest, letting out an agonizing, gut-wrenching howl that echoed off the redwood trees. It was the sound of an alpha's spirit breaking. I didn't stick around to watch the fallout. My contract was fulfilled. Later that evening, I was packing the last of my things in the guest quarters. I was ready to go back to the city, ready to start my new foundation with the $50 million sitting in my trust. The door opened softly. Domenico stood there. He looked 10 years older. Leo confessed. He said his voice devoid of any emotion. He admitted everything. The council is banishing him the second he's medically cleared to travel. Karma, I said simply, zipping up my duffel bag. Domenico took a step toward me, his eyes shining with desperate, frantic tears. Caleb, please. You have to understand. I was blinded by pack politics, by my mother, by the pressure. But I see you now. You're an Aurelian. We were betrothed. We are meant to be together. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll worship the ground you walk on. He reached out to touch my arm. Before his fingers could even graze my sleeve, a massive hand clamped down on his wrist, twisting it just enough to make Domenico wince. A low, terrifying growl filled the room, vibrating the glass in the windows. Standing behind Domenico was Harrison. Harrison was the alpha commander of the city's shifter task force, the man who had been put in charge of Redwood's administration per my contract. He was a towering, heavily scarred alpha, with a scent of dark roast coffee and cold steel. He was also the man who had stayed by my side during my toughest heats in the city, never pushing, never demanding, just protecting. Do not touch him, Harrison warned, his voice a lethal rumbling baritone. He effortlessly shoved Domenico back toward the door. This is pack business. Domenico snarled his own alpha instincts, trying to fight back, but he was too weak, too broken. It's not your pack anymore, Domenico, I said, walking over and standing right next to Harrison. I let my hand rest naturally against Harrison's chest, and I felt the powerful, steady thrum of his heartbeat. The commander instantly relaxed his scent, wrapping around me, defensively, completely neutralizing Domenico's presence. And I'm not your Omega. I haven't been for a very long time. Domenico looked at my hand on Harrison's chest. He realized in that agonizing final moment that he had lost completely. He hadn't just lost his pride and his power. He had lost the one person who could have given him everything. He backed out of the room, tears finally spilling over his cheeks, and closed the door. The next morning, Harrison and I drove out of the Redwood estate. The sun was breaking through the thick, foggy canopy of the trees, bathing the highway in warm, golden light. I looked out the window at the road, where I had once curled up in the freezing mud, begging to die. Now I had a fortune, a foundation the rarest bloodline in the shifter world, and an alpha who actually knew what the word respect meant. The Redwood pack survived, but Domenico never regained his title. He lives on the fringes of the territory, now a solitary guard haunted by the ghost of the boy he threw away. As for Leo, he was banished to a rogue sector, stripped of his synthetic pheromones, forced to live as the unremarkable beta he always was. I took the $50 million and built the Aurelian Sanctuary. It's a sprawling state-of-the-art facility in Oregon that provides housing, medical care, and legal defense for Omegas who have been rejected, abused, or deemed defective by archaic pack laws. Harrison runs the security detail, and together we make sure that no Omega ever has to shiver in the rain again. Sometimes your biggest perceived flaw is exactly the thing that will make you a king. You just have to survive long enough to let it bloom. And that's the whole truth, guys. That's how a defective null brought the strongest pack in California to its knees and walked away with everything. If this story resonated with you, or if you just love a good karma payoff, please hit that like button, share the video with anyone who needs a reminder of their worth, and subscribe to the channel for more crazy shifter story times. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.